Hello, my name is José Antonio Ferrer, and I'm a research member at the Energy Efficiency in Buildings and R&D unit within the Energy Department of CIEMAT, and here I shall offer a brief introduction to the course on energy efficiency in buildings. In current systems, energy consumption is considered to be one of the indicators of socioeconomic and industrial development, but this is an approach that leaves out many of the aspects of energy efficiency, when in fact it really should be the main indicator of development. That is, maintaining efficiency in the consumption of the population without increasing energy expenditure. By focusing on development in terms of energy, we shall be able to achieve not only increasing levels of comfort in our cities and buildings, managing to generalize energy for it to reach a greater number of people, but we shall also be able to reduce energy consumption in the processes involved. In this way, we can achieve improvements in the competitiveness of industries so that energy efficiency can become one of the elements favorable to the economic reactivation of a country. One of the sectors with great potential is the building industry. In this sense, we should consider, from the very early stages in the urban planning of cities, what the objective we really want to achieve is in terms of development and design, naturally being aware that this urban approach and the subsequent development of buildings should be designed and planned for the place where the buildings are to be located. However, individual solutions cannot be exported, because they depend largely on the weather and location where they are to be applied. Thus, each individual case must be examined on an individual basis.
En gran parte del clima y del lugar donde se van a aplicar. Cada caso debe ser individual y debe ser estudiado de una forma individualizada.
So we must first consider that the environment is not a hostile enemy that we must bring down. Quite the opposite. We must be able to communicate with the environment and take advantage of and optimize the benefits and sources of energy at our disposal, such as the sun, the wind, or the terrain itself. In other words, we must learn to converse with the environment and design our cities and buildings so that they will be friendly to it and so we can use it as an ally.
Que sean amigables con el entorno y que lo tengan como un aliado. En segundo lugar, tenemos que ser capaces.
Second, we must be able to design our buildings to consume as little energy as possible. In the case of already existing buildings, we must be aware that one of the most important tools is the energy rehabilitation of these buildings. In other words, we are looking to how we may modify what already exists to make it more efficient. For this, we need to be aware of a number of natural conditioning techniques that will allow us, as mentioned before, to make the most of these natural sources at our disposal in the environment and to optimize them in a way that is economically profitable. This involves reducing the maximum energy demand of our cities. We must be aware that the cheapest and least polluting kilowatt is the one that was never generated, and therefore we should attack first the energy demand of buildings and cities. Once the minimization of demand has been set in place, the next step is to address the energy that we have not been able to supply by passive sources in order to supply it with active energy systems. Regarding these, first we should prioritize the systems based on renewable energy. Then we must be aware that these systems must be actually integrated into our buildings, since we are not talking about solar thermal power plants, but real buildings where people live and work. In sum, the aesthetic factor is important when it comes to performing this type of action. Finally, if it is still not possible to supply all the energy required after the decrease in demand, supplemented by renewable energies, we should consider the use of conventional energy, but searching for the most efficient systems on the market to provide that energy supply. This leads us to the next step, which is the use of distributed generation systems in cities, at neighborhood or district level. This is so that we can optimize energy efficiency and so that citizens can participate in the distribution system and energy management at city level. We are therefore looking for a scenario in which the buildings of a city will play an interactive role, not merely something that demands energy from the city, but one that can also communicate with other city systems, thereby creating a kind of crosstalk between the city and its buildings. In a sense, buildings will be elements that require energy from cities, but they themselves will have integrated these renewable energies and will send the unused energy back to the district electricity grid. This course will address these concepts in 6 modules. In the first part, we shall see how communications should be established between buildings, the city, and the environment. How, depending on whether we are in an area with extreme climatology, cold, hot, humid, equatorial, and so on, we should design buildings with different orientations and what tools we can use to accomplish these aims. In a second phase, we shall examine natural conditioning techniques that can be applied in the design of our buildings and our cities, taking into account that there are no general recipes and considering that each situation, as mentioned before, is a particular case that we must study in a detailed way. Despite this, of course, it is possible to apply general principles in our particular cases. Finally, we shall see how we can integrate these renewable energy sources in our buildings and in our cities in order to gain a global, holistic conception of the whole energy issue in buildings and cities. In brief, the basic aims are to attempt to reduce the energy demand of buildings and therefore of cities, to obtain the maximum amount of energy possible by means of renewable energy systems, and finally, to consider cities as complete entities in which buildings form an integral part, along with the environment, in which this energy dialogue, as it were, is established between each of the agents. All this should be prioritized not only at the level of research institutions and the administration, but also at the level of society as a whole and the public in general, so that it will eventually become a concept that is fully rooted in the design of our buildings and our cities. Thank you for your attention.